David Torrey with Our Revolution, Pierce County. When you guys, this is a what-if scenario, forgive me. When you guys do get elected, how do you stop the gridlock? We're talking about not just resisting, but moving forward. Congress is very divided right now, very much so on partisan lines. How are you going to move forward with your colleagues on the right side and on the left side?
Gridlock is this great concept. We've got Congress that, let's do the Senate because it's easy numbers. It's 100 people. If you've got 51, you've got control. If you've got 60, you've got a filibuster-proof majority. The problem we have with the two teams, Republican versus Democrat, is blue no matter who, red no matter who. Once you have 51, if there's no filibuster, or 60 if there is the ability for a filibuster, you can block any legislation you want. You can ram any legislation through you want. All we need in the Senate is just enough to break the 50-51 if there's no filibuster, or 60. So if you get 5 or 10 independents into the Senate, you no longer have the ability for either side to bully through. You don't have to work across the aisle. Now it's the Republicans' responsibility to craft a reasonable bill and earn those 10 independents' votes. And they have to do that by logic and reason, not by, well, you're red, you're voting our way, or we'll cut off the funds to your next campaign. I'm trying to remember the vote. There was a vote on the House floor 4 years ago that the Republicans had lost. And they held the vote open and literally ran people down to the no votes. And it was the responsible House re-election committee person was talking to each one of them, and they flipped enough votes in a few seconds to change the outcome of that vote. That person, that runner, that conversation basically consisted of, you'll flip your vote or we'll support your opponent in the next election bid. That is why you get red on one team, blue on the other. Not only do they vote as a block, but because they're dependent on the team, they get blackmailed into that block. If you get a small chunk of independent voices, Democratic Socialists, True Independents, Green Party, Republican who won't caucus with the Republicans because he doesn't need Republican money, Democrats same way. You get just a small block in I'll say the middle, but they're not necessarily centrists. And now every issue has to be legislated on rational discussion. Because if the Republicans want tax breaks and they want to vote as a block, they have to make those tax breaks reasonable to buy those 10 votes, to get those 10 people's intellectual buy-in so that they can get a majority and get a vote through. You don't need the largest party to control House and Senate. You need a small enough block in the middle that neither of the two established parties can dominate either blocking or pushing an issue. That's how you work across the aisle. You give them no choice but to be reasonable instead of this backdoor dealing where I get reelected because look at the money I brought back to my state. Never mind that to do that, I had to agree to the effectively equivalent bribes to all 49 other states, to their representatives in backdoor dealing. That's how you work across the aisle. And when you get a couple of independents elected, you get a couple of independent parties, you'll start seeing Democrats and Republicans, the good ones that are in that party that have so far been cowed, you'll see them saying, well, I can vote with this person on a reasonable basis. And if that challenges me, if my willingness to not cut the child health care program gets me kicked out of the Republican Party, that's fine. I'll run as one of these independents that have shown they can be elected. This is the wedge that we break into the party. It's just a small number of independent voices, and that forces more reasonable discussion. As the parties start to see that they have to be reasonable, when the party is unreasonable, members that are reasonable will jump out of that party, will go against their own party, and that's how you work across party lines. Not, I bribe you, you bribe me, and we come to some mutually agreed backdoor solution where we can call it bipartisan, which basically means we were both bought by the same group and we're pretending that it's a grassroots issue. That's how you break the gridlock. That's how you work across the aisle.
So, I mean, I think one of the biggest ways, too, that you can really break through the gridlock is we talked a lot about money in politics and its effect, and I think that continues even up to a congressional level, and I think it actually has something to do with gridlock. Because when you have a number of representatives that are united under the umbrella of one donor who are all bribed or told to vote a certain way or, forced to or stare down the barrel of having their donations removed, they kind of come together and clump together for these bills that they vote in favor of, even if they don't actually read the bills or care what's in them, just because they're told by their donors to do it. But the more individuals you have that are in Congress who are grassroots funded, who are funded by the people they're representing, they're not beholden to Democrat or Republican bills that are introduced. They're not beholden to donor bills that are sponsored or lobbyist bills that are introduced. They get to vote on legislation based on the merits of that legislation, because that's what they're there to do. That's why I'm running. I'm a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat. But a bill has to have merit for me to vote for it. And it's because I don't have any kind of interest group that's pressuring me. I don't have any kind of outside influence. I'm here to represent people because because of people and for people. And that's the kind of representation we need to support in Congress. And you get that way not just by having one representative, by continuously supporting and helping to elect other representatives with similar values. One of the groups I'm endorsed by is Brandon Congress. And our entire philosophy is you can be a progressive Republican. You can be a progressive independent. You can be viable and real and work together across the aisle because we agree on a hell of a lot more than we disagree. We're just told repeatedly over and over again, oh no, they're evil Democrats, or oh, they're evil Republicans. But the fact is, most Republicans want single-payer Medicare for all. Most Republicans want access to debt-free education. The thing that I find unifies a lot of them is when we talk about investment in infrastructure. So you talk about investing in our U.S. infrastructure, both sides of the aisle will cheer from the front to the back of the room when you talk about it. We agree on so many progressive values, but we're not using this term progressive Republican. We're not looking at the Republicans as progressive, but we need to start because the common everyday, Republican voter or conservative voter is going to agree with progressives on a lot of things. And so the more we're willing to talk about where we do agree, and the more we're willing to work on these battles and coalesce around these battles where we actually have agreement across party lines, the better we're going to fare when we bring these bills up to a vote. So if we want to put in that $4.6 trillion infrastructure investment, go find your fellow Republicans, Democrats, go find your fellow progressives, go find your fellow independents, and pitch them the merits of the bill, not who's going to be the one who introduces it. Who cares if it's a D or an R on the end of that bill if it's a good bill? And that's where we really need to focus our efforts and get behind candidates that are going to really try and be champions for those things. I am actually very proud to be on the Brandon Congress slate with two Republicans who I love and adore dearly, Rob Ryerson of Arkansas 3 and Mark Whitmire out of Tennessee 2, I think. They are awesome people. And every time we sit down and talk, Rob blows me away because we're sitting and chatting and having a great time talking about progressive issues. And he goes, bet you forgot I was a Republican, didn't you? And I'm like, you got me, Rob. I totally did. And so they exist. They're real. They're not unicorns. They're far more of the Republican Party than we think. We just need to have open-minded representatives who aren't going to shut people out just because of how they voted in one election, because that doesn't define you. And this polarization we've got is making it worse. And we need representatives who are going to say, okay, they voted for this person, but why? How can I have a conversation with them? How can I talk to them about the issues rather than the vote? Because that's what's more important. You just have to be willing to overlook someone's party alignment.
Yeah. And to expand that a little bit, we got to remember that most people choose their party based on their surroundings, not on their beliefs. So if you were born in a house that was mostly Republican, you might identify as Republican, even if you agree with a lot of progressive values, and vice versa. You might be very conservative, but identify as Democrat because that's what your family and your friends identify as, and that's what you know. And you're seeing that party through whatever filter you were raised in. So the poll after poll after poll shows that the core progressive values that Bernie Sanders introduced to people, that other progressives like Ro Khanna have introduced to people back and support. But the both people are voters in both parties are unhappy with their representation. That's also not a party issue. Democrats don't represent Democrats, and Republicans don't represent Republican voters. So it's across the aisle. A great way to get through that gridlock beyond what everybody else has said is to also speak to the voters directly and have them put pressure on their representatives. You want this to pass? Call your representative. And that is working right now, even without the progressives in office. There are a few, like I mentioned, Ro Khanna, very progressive, also a Justice Democrat now.
Yep, Raul Grijalva,
yep.
too. Pramila Jayapal. You've got these progressives that are in office, and it's so important that they keep making these progressive efforts because they're resonating with Republicans.
Yeah, what we're talking about is issues about people. We're not talking about vague promises. We're not talking about polarizing things. Yes, we feel abortion is this, they feel abortion is that. That's a polarizing issue. Let's table that for now. We know where we stand. A lot of them know where we stand just because we're progressive. And we're either on Democratic or Green Party. They understand that. But if we talk about actual issues that will help them, then we can reach across the aisle and get that support in Congress.
You can prove to people that they can break out of the box. Just because you say I'm a Democrat, it doesn't mean that you're committed to all of the centrist stereotypes that we're seeing now. That doesn't mean that. You can be something like a pro-choice Republican. You can be a Democrat that's fine with no gun control. You can break out of these shells and these molds, and you don't have to have a term for it. It's a big, broad, sweeping term, and we have to be really, really careful that we don't let the language be co-opted and hurt and used against us to injure the movement.
That's actually one of the reasons why I'm running as an independent. Earlier, it seems like as I'm talking to people, if I mention any party, regardless of whether I said yes, I'm affiliated with the Green Party, they have that notion of, oh, I already know what you stand for.
The shutdown.
Whereas you say, oh, I'm an independent, and you say, well, what are your issues? They're forced to almost think about what their issues are rather than I already know what you stand for, I'm either for you or against you.
Yeah.
And when you start having those kinds of discussions, it almost fosters their interest. Oh, I'm actually getting interested in politics. I care about this issue. And that's something that just doesn't happen in almost any discourse that I've seen. And it's, well, I have this idea, I have this idea, we both against it, and that's where it's left off. It's not, well, how can we make it an idea that works for both of us, for everyone